Okay, let's dive into this. Mother's Day, usually, you expect nice stories, maybe some kind of gestures. But this past Mother's Day, wow, the news really threw us a curveball.
It really did.
We had a former president maybe getting a $400 million jet, a Mother's Day gift that was actually for sale,
Right.
and then some pretty head-scratching stuff happening with international talks.
Yeah, it felt like you said, puzzle pieces just scattered everywhere.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to do here, right? See if we
Yeah.
can piece some of it together for you.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is how these things that seem totally separate, a jet, a hat, some diplomatic talk they might actually connect, they raise some pretty basic questions about how things work at that level. We've got this YouTube transcript. It's packed with detail. And, well, our mission here in this deep dive is to pull out the really important bits and try to understand what they might be telling us.
Right. Let's kick off with that headline that really jumped out at me. ABC News reporting Trump is poised to accept a $400 million jet from Qatar.
Cutter. Yeah, Cutter. That's how the source spelled it.
Yeah. And forget just extra legroom. This is apparently a Boeing 737, gold-plated walls.
Gold-plated walls, that's what it said.
And here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. The story is this jet is for him to use after his presidency. And eventually it's supposed to become part of his presidential library.
Which, immediately flags the scale of it. $400 million. Makes you think about the norms, right?
Yeah.
What's usually considered okay for a former leader to receive.
Yeah.
I mean, presidential libraries, sure, they get big donations, but a gift like this for personal use afterwards, it's pretty unusual.
Absolutely. And the source we're looking at, it actually flags a few other interesting financial links, foreign ones.
Oh, right. There was more, wasn't there?
Yeah, they mention a hotel and resort in Qatar, another one in Oman that's linked to Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund.
Which, just for clarity, is like a state-owned investment fund, right?
Yeah.
Built for national money.
Exactly. Then there's this mention of Abu Dhabi using $2 billion in Trump crypto.
Trump crypto, yeah. That one definitely makes you pause. What even is that?
I know. And finally, Don Jr.'s executive branch club.
Right.
The source really makes a point that, just the sheer number of these deals and maybe the lack of really deep analysis connecting them, it's something we should probably pay attention to.
And if you sort of step back and look at that pattern, like the source suggests, these international financial dealings, well, it does raise some pretty big questions, doesn't it? About potential influence, the complexities of a former leader's money ties globally.
Okay, let's pivot now. Something that felt maybe a bit more like standard politics, but still had a twist. Mother's Day comes along. Trump posts Happy Mother's Day.
Okay, standard enough.
So far, so normal. But then it links to a limited edition Meiji A hat.
Ah.
And the catch, which the source jumps on immediately, is, well, it wasn't free. You had to buy it.
Right, it wasn't a gift from him. It was a gift to him, potentially, if you bought it.
Yeah. The source uses a pretty blunt word for it, actually. Calls it grifting, highlighting that, transactional nature of the message on that particular day.
It is interesting, isn't it, how political messages and fundraising opportunities often get woven together. I mean, campaign merch is normal, obviously.
Yeah.
But framing it around that holiday dedicated to, moms, it does create a certain dynamic. Some people might find that noteworthy.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears again. Different continent, potential diplomacy, Russia and Ukraine. So the background is Putin saying he was open to talks in Turkey, May 15th. The source presents this as maybe a reaction to Ukraine's own diplomatic efforts.
Okay.
And Putin's stated reason was basically to see if Ukraine really wants to have peace.
Which, you have to look at the context here. The source points out that this question about Ukraine wanting peace, it came when, according to their reporting, Ukraine had actually agreed to an unconditional ceasefire.
While Russia was still...
While Russian military actions were apparently still ongoing. So that's a pretty big difference in perspective right there.
Yeah, definitely. And then Trump jumps in, urges Ukraine to immediately agree to this meeting in Turkey.
Immediately.
He also sort of expresses his own doubts as Ukraine really want a deal. And then he brings up the U.S. role in World War II, which seemed a bit out of left field.
And how did the source interpret that?
Well, they basically saw Trump's reaction as Not really diplomacy, non-diplomacy, I think was the term.
Okay.
And they suggested it could even be seen as, well, Putin may be manipulating Trump, or at least an example of external influence.
That analysis really hits on something important, doesn't it? Just the sheer complexity of international communication, how different people, different actors can interpret things and react in ways that, well, suit their own goals.
Yeah.
And Trump just jumping in, telling Ukraine to agree without much context.
Yeah.
It definitely adds another layer to an already very tangled situation.
Okay, last big topic area. This takes us to Switzerland, U.S.-China trade talks.
Right, the ongoing saga.
Yeah. And the source starts this part off with a pretty heavy dose of skepticism.
Doesn't surprise me, given the history.
No, they mention past alleged misinformation, and this is a direct quote, Trump regime lies about everything.
Wow, okay. Strong words.
Yeah. And, the whole long history of the trade war. But despite that kind of cautious intro, the U.S. did put out statements after 2 days of talks. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, according to our source,
Okay.
reported substantial progress, said more details would come.
Substantial progress. Always sounds good.
And the U.S. trade rep, Jameson Greer, in this source,
Maria got it.
expressed confidence that the deal will help us to work toward resolving the trade deficit.
Work toward resolving. That
Well-
feels a little hedged.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Work toward feels a bit less definite than maybe you'd hope after substantial progress.
Definitely. And the fact that, at least when the source was put together, we hadn't heard from China's top person, it suggests the picture was still, developing.
Yeah.
Not quite settled.
Absolutely. Now, China did release statements later through their state media, Xinhua and China Daily, and their message was pretty firm.
Okay, what did they say?
They said China is still committed to the, international economic and trade order. They said they initiated contact, thinking about global expectations, their own interests, and interestingly, appeals from U.S. businesses and consumers.
So framing it as responding to multiple pressures.
Right. But they also stressed very clearly that their determination to protect their own interests is unshakable.
Unshakable. Okay.
They basically said if the U.S. is serious, they need to deal with the harm from the U.S. tariffs, respect trade rules, and avoid coercion.
So laying down some conditions.
Pretty much. They called the talks a crucial step, but said getting a resolution needs strategic patience and perseverance.
Patience, yeah, not a quick fix.
And international support for fairness. Mutual respect, they said, that's the foundation.
That's a very clear statement of their position, isn't it? Willing to talk, but here are our terms. Here are our principles, especially on tariffs and respect.
Exactly. Now, let's contrast that with comments from Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, according to the source.
Lutnick, okay, what was his take?
He apparently stated they expect a 10% baseline tariff for all countries.
Wow, okay, across the board.
And then made the claim that tariffs will never lead to increased prices.
Oh, really? That's bold.
Yeah. The source we're using definitely takes issue with that claim. We even have a little audio clip here of Lutnick. He basically says, businesses won't pay the tariff. Foreign entities will just have to compete.
That's a really, really significant difference in perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea that tariffs don't affect prices, that's, well, heavily debated by economists, to put it mildly.
Right.
So the source highlighting that gap
What?
and contrasting it with the sort of more traditional economic logic in the Chinese statements, it really underlines the clashes here. Different fundamental views on how trade even works.
And the source also just quickly throws in a couple of other unrelated news bits.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Warnings about summer power outages, an FAA ground stop in Newark, air traffic control equipment problem, apparently the 92nd time.
92nd, well.
Yeah. And a comment from the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, in this source, about how long it takes to get experienced air traffic controllers back.
Right, staffing issues there too.
But bringing it back to the trade thing, the source kind of wraps up by suggesting maybe any deal that comes out of this might just be undoing the screw-up that Trump did in the first place, starting the trade war.
So just getting back to square one, potentially.
Potentially. And they also expressed some suspicion about maybe market manipulation around these talks and announcements.
Which, yeah, that kind of context is really important. Seeing these talks not just as a snapshot, but part of this longer story of policy shifts and trade tensions and skepticism about market reactions. That's pretty common when you're talking about negotiations with such huge economic stakes.
So when we kind of step back and put all these different threads together, what are we actually looking at? This deep dive into our source material. It paints this really fascinating picture, doesn't it, of just one moment in time where you've got international finance, domestic politics, global diplomacy, all intersecting in these really interesting, sometimes weird ways.
Exactly. And by looking at these things that might seem unconnected, the jet, the hat, the talks, through the lens of this source, we've tried to give you a clearer picture of the different stories being told and, what the potential significance might be.
Which brings us, I guess, to our final thought for you, the listener. When you consider all these different strands, the big money deals with other countries, the tactics used for political engagement at home, this very delicate dance of global diplomacy and trade, what underlying strategies might actually be at play here?
Yeah, what are the bigger patterns? Or the long-term implications that might come out of these events as they keep unfolding?
What's really driving these actions? And ultimately, how might it affect all of us in the wider world? Something to think about.